who also could search out the overpowered millers in the process of getting themselves into the grave, and can also use their effects from the graveyard instead of having to be on the field or in the hand, which means if they're randomly milled through a Gito or Kelback, they're live. And since they're both quick effects, you can absolutely use them in order to disrupt your opponent's graveyard plays. Mudora and Keldo are so powerful that while Ishizu was at full power, you could not play other decks that relied on the graveyard in almost any way, besides other Tier Limit Ishizu decks, because Mudora and Keldo completely shut down the graveyard. In fact, even today, when both of the millers are banned and Mudora and Keldo are only available at one copy, they're still played quite regularly because their shuffle effects are just that overpowered. On top of it all, they're all level 4 monsters that can special summon themselves from the hand, which means you can use them to go into rank 4 XC's plays, who can then later on go to the graveyard to trigger their effects, except for a Gito and Kelback who specifically have to be sent to the graveyard from your hand or deck. And this meant that if you played the Shizu engine, you also had access to number 41 Baguska the Terrible Attire Tapir and Abyss Dweller, 2 floodgates which could just shut down all your opponent's monsters or turn off your opponent's graveyard entirely. To give more of an indication of just how strong milling 10 cards and then being able to disrupt 6 of them is, we're going to go over a couple of very good graveyard effects. Fairy Tail Snow is a level 4 monster which can special summon itself from the graveyard by banishing 7 other cards from your hand, field, or grave. Then when it's summoned, you can Book of Moon one of your opponent's cards. Destrudel, the Lost Dragon's Prison, can special summon itself in the grave as long as you control a level 6 or lower monster, which gives you a 2-turn board to allow you to go into synchros. Rainbow Bridge of Salvation allows you to search out any field spell with its graveyard effect, and Metal Foes Fusion just straight up allows you to draw a card. Then there's really good cards which activate when they're sent to the graveyard, like all of the tier limits, which allow you to go into fusions and mill more. Shadow Beast will let you draw a card, Triclown, Wolf, Felis, Dotscaper, Nightsword Serpent, and Revival Golem, which can all special summon themselves if they're sent to the graveyard, Goki Pole, which can search out Danger Mothman, Eva, which can search out Herald Light, Tackle Crusader, which can Book of Moon a monster, and even Farfa, which can banish a monster. Then there's cards in the graveyard which can gain advantage if they're banished from the graveyard. Cards like Giant Rex, Algol Mazura, Dotscaper, DD Scout Plane, Shinobi Necro, Ascan, and Zeb, which can all special summon themselves if they're banished from the graveyard. Or cards like Thunder Dragon Roar, Resident Insect, Ghost Wyvern, Chaos Witch, Shiranui Samurai, and the 3 Sword Soul Traps, which can all special summon other monsters if they're banished from the graveyard. Or cards like Thunder Dragon Dark, Dragon Matrix, Neptune, Ascension, Mercurier, Shiranui Squire, and all 4 Dragon Rulers, which allow you to gain advantage if they're banished from the graveyard. So not only are there a lot of really good cards with graveyard effects and cards which can use resources from the graveyard, these are also all really good targets to be removed from the graveyard with Mudora and Keldo, which shows you why they see play despite the fact that the other cards have been banned. And let's talk about the bannings. Currently, Kelbeck and Agito are banned in all formats, with Keldo and Mudora being limited in all formats. And with how many decks have archetype-specific cards that are good in the graveyard, or archetype-specific ways of reviving cards in the graveyard, it really shows how ridiculously powerful these 4 cards were. It's kind of insane that literally all of them are good and worked together so well, and came out with one of the best graveyard-centric decks ever made with the tier limits. As long as people are using transaction rollback to copy Yobug Nest from the graveyard, the game is not at a point where Ishizu cards can be lifted off the ban list. Modern Yu-Gi-Oh! Is just too revolved around the graveyard, and being able to get so many pure resources into the graveyard so easily just kind of speeds up the game into a new level of power. Modern tier limits Ishizus can still beat pretty much any meta deck that currently exists, and it's kind of hard to see how they could possibly power creep again to get away from this, other than making floodgates more abundant. To say it again, the Ishizu cards do not fail because they're bad. On the contrary, they're so incredibly good that I doubt we'll ever see cards like them again. And in fact, I'd be surprised to see Agito or Kelbeck unbanned without some kind of errata. You know they messed up when basically all of their main cards are on the ban list, just like they did with the Dragon Rulers all those years ago.
escape from all the pain and stress. And when I do come back, I'm stronger than ever before. So kneel down this burning of peace. Look into my eyes. Now tell me the things you love about behind my back. Definitely, our heart is hard to break down. It's to let go. I wonder this is going down.
Opportunity game is chance. This is obvious when coins are flipped and dice are thrown, but chance in Yu-Gi-Oh! Runs much deeper than that. Is the meta skewed enough that an anti-meta deck has a shot at winning? Should you commit all of your resources to go for game, or hold back to save some gas to outplay your opponent on the next turn? No coins are involved, but there are still gambles, and these cards are too. And raging forward to kick this list off with the number 10 spot is the quick play spell Berserker Soul. Since this card can only be played when your monster inflicts 1500 or less damage in a direct attack, and requires you to discard your entire hand to activate, just running this card is already a huge risk. Let's check out the payoff. After you've thrown down your Berserker Soul Gauntlet, he'll excavate the top card of your deck. And if it's a monster, it's sent to the graveyard and your opponent takes 500 points of damage. Then you do it again and again, up to 7 more times. Here's the gamble. If you excavate a spell or trap, Berserker Soul finishes out without any further excavations or burns. When you activate Berserker Soul, you're wagering that at least your next few cards will be monsters. If your next 8 draws do not include a spell or trap, Berserker Soul will mill 8 and inflict 4000 points of damage. This is an incredible effect that could easily swing any duel, but that's why it's so hard to pull off. Unsurprising for a card that's extremely difficult and costly to activate for potentially no upside, Berserker Soul has seen exactly no competitive placements in the TCG since its release in 2014's Dragon of Legend set. What makes Berserker Soul worthy of note beyond its desperate and finicky effect is its high-profile appearance in the Waking the Dragons arc in the original Duel Monsters anime. In episode 162, Yama-Yugi faces off against the longtime C-tier rival, Weevil Underwood. Unfortunately, Weevil's deck received a huge buff from Weevil committing his soul to darts and the Seal of the Orichalcos, trading ownership of his soul for the power to maybe get back at the King of Games for defeating him over 150 episodes ago. Also, Weevil challenged Yugi to a duel on the top of a runaway train, which made for a pretty epic bout, but wow, was this arc literally off the rails. Even with the Pharaoh at the time the most vulnerable he's ever been, the spirit of Yugi having been siphoned by the Great Leviathan following his loss to Raphael, and the legendary dragon Timaeus angry with him for causing an outcome by playing the soul-stealing field spell, Yama-Yugi was still able to put an intense back and forth against the empowered Weevil. Then things got a little heated. Weevil held up a Gogi-Bori card, but kept the front hidden from the Pharaoh. With sadistic pleasure, the insect duelist claimed that the soul of Yugimoto had been locked away in the card that he held, the one that he then ripped in half and scattered to the whipping train wind while the Pharaoh watched in horror. Unsurprisingly, this turned out to be a critical misplay. Or did it? Let's dig in. Enraged, Yama-Yugi activates Berserker Soul and has his Breaker, the Magical Warrior, slash into Weevil 7 consecutive times. Weevil's life points had long since dropped to 0, but the Pharaoh continued excavating and slashing for no other reason than to make Weevil suffer. He only stopped to let the duel finally terminate at the behest of Taya Gardner, who found his Dark Shift alarming. Yugi also realized that the 8th card he drew but never weaponized was the Dark Magician Girl, who was symbolic of the hope that the Pharaoh would save the world. Obviously, Berserker Soul didn't turn out well for Weevil, but it did play into the overall strategy of Darts against the Pharaoh, which was to force him to realize and embrace his own evil nature. Raphael was successful in his regard by convincing the Pharaoh to activate the Silver Orcalcos, and Weevil was too in his own way. Yugimoto has always been a positive influence on the Pharaoh, calling him back from the ruthless decisions the spirit of the puzzle would later regret, like knocking Seto Kaiba off the ramparts of the Castle Pegasus. While Berserker Soul can claim a pivotal moment in the Duel Monsters anime, the actual card that released a decade after the rematch between the Pharaoh and Weevil Underwood was very bad. So bad that it can only take the bottom spot of this list. Don't be like the Pharaoh, don't take this gamble, you'll make Taya sad and probably lose a duel anyway. And the card we're drafting from the number 9 spot on this list is Conscription, a normal trap that was released in 2005 as part of the Cybernetic Revolution set. On activation, Conscription has your opponent activate the top card of the deck. If they pull a monster that could be normal summoned or set, you can special summon it to your field. If they pull anything else, the card stays in their hand. No coins are flipped, but when you activate Conscription, one of two things will happen. You'll either get a free body on your board, or let your opponent go +2 in card advantage. The riskiness of Conscription is also enhanced by excavating from your opponent's deck. Since you have no control of the cards your opponent chooses, you can't tilt the odds in your favor by stacking your own deck. Building your deck around Berserker Soul is almost always going to be a losing strategy, but at least you can do it. Conscription will always be a shot in the dark, hoping that your opponent's running a lot of normal summons. This inherent uncertainty is surely the reason Conscription has seen 0 competitive placements despite being in circulation for almost 20 years. But in the early days of Duel Links, Conscription did see experimentation. Available from the start in the Ultimate Rising main block, Conscription was a useful tool in early mill decks. These decks mostly revolved around using Assault on GHQ to take cards off the top of your opponent's deck. By running Jowls of Dark Demise to take control of enemy monsters, you could sack your opponent's cards as cost to resolve Assault on GHQ, with Warm Worm being another option to destroy for even more mill. Because Assault on GHQ needed bodies, and because the sting of giving your opponent a free draw was softened by getting them one card closer to decking out, Conscription saw some play as a risky stall with potential high payoff. Usage of Conscription dropped over time as better options entered the game, but it still had its moments. It also had its moments in 2013's Battle Pack 2, War of the Giants. This product was intended for use in sealed play, where duelists will be deck building with the packs they pull and duel on the spot. While it wouldn't be the cornerstone to anyone's strategy, in that format you use what you pull, and a desperate Conscription activation can turn a tough spot around, even if it might bury you instead. And what's the number 8 pick of this list? The answer to that question is Question. It's a normal spell that forces your opponent into a guessing game. Once the card is played, your opponent can no longer check your graveyard. This is relevant because they must now guess the final monster from the bottom of your graveyard. If your opponent is an omniscient Quizlord and calls correctly, that monster is banished. If they get it wrong, you can special summon it. This might sound pretty easy, as all they do is remember, right? But with the speed of modern Yu-Gi-Oh! Play, it's entirely conceivable and even likely for your opponent to flub their guess. Add to that the many cards that banish or shuffle from grave, and the difficulty the question posed can be extreme. This card is an oldie from 2003's Pharaonic Guardian, but despite this, it has never seen competitive play. It's hard to justify running Question when both Monster Reborn and Call the Haunted came out in 2002. Still, Question's game show design inspiration and unique chance mechanic make this card an interesting piece of niche Yu-Gi-Oh! Question actually has a few anime appearances, including one high-profile use in Joey Wheeler's duel against Yami Merrick in the Battle City semifinals. After a long and grueling shadow game, Joey Wheeler activated Question, forcing Yami Merrick to guess the bottom card in his grave. Merrick, whose strategy revolved around using sadistic cards like Coffin Seller, Drolego, and Helbamir, was too focused on inflicting suffering on Joey's soul and failed to anticipate the importance of Joey's bond with his monsters. Since Helbamir's graveyard effect caused Joey to discard from hand, Yami Merrick had no way of guessing that Jinzo was Joey's revival target. Even though Joey would end up losing the duel once Merrick's relentless torture left him unable to stand, the activation of Question was a huge victory for Joey, who proved to himself and everyone watching that although Yami Merrick was indeed powerful, his arrogant sadism was also a huge vulnerability. In the end, Question might be only the number 8 pick for this list, but remember this dude and his mustache because there's no question about it, he'll be showing up later. First releasing as a secret rare in the 2012 Premium Collection 10, Ma'at is the number 7 pick for this list, and also the number of Millennium items depicted in this card's art. Honestly, you could argue only 6 are actually shown, but for the sake of symmetry on this list, we're sticking with the line that the Eye of Widget on Mahat's forehead is the Millennium Eye. Millennium items have deep ties to games of chance, since one of their central powers is to enable the holder to force shadow games on opponents. These shadow games exact a terrible cost to the loser, and do not always take the form of dual monsters, as seen in episode 39 of the Dual Monsters anime when Yami Bakura and Maximilian Pegasus engage in a reality-distorting laser light show. But actually making use of its 7 Millennium items is not what earns Ma'at number 7. Let's look at its gambling effect. When Ma'at hits the field, its base question mark attack and defense starts at 0, which might seem low for a level 10 light fairy that can only be summoned from your hand by sending a light dragon and a light fairy control to the grave. It won't stay that way. Once per turn, you can activate Ma'atan's effect by declaring 3 card names. After that, you activate the top 3 cards of your deck, and any cards that match your declarations are added to your hand, with Ma'atan's attack shifting to equal to the number of cards that went to your hand times 1000. The other cards fall to the graveyard, making the worst outcome of Ma'atan's effect a simple mill 3, which can still be useful in decks that favor a robust grave. The best Ma'atan outcome is pretty hard to beat. Basically, drawing 3 for no penalty is fantastic. Card Demise is currently limited to 1 in the TCG for being able to provide the same effect, but with a whole bunch of extra restrictions. So why hasn't Ma'at seen much in the way of competitive play? Well, sending 2 specific types of monsters from your field to the grave isn't an insurmountable cost, but it is steep. And unless you're running cards to stack your deck like Card Advance or Absolute King Backjack, you can't count a Ma'at breaking even in card advantage. And with its stat line reliant on the success of its effect, Ma'at becomes even more difficult as a card to utilize effectively. There have been more reliable ways to ready a 3000 attack beat stick since the game began. Despite its 7 visual references to the Dual Monsters anime, Ma'at never appeared on screen. Probably because wielding every Millennium item would bestow with a power far exceeding the text printed on the card. Ma'at does have 1 appearance in the UOGX manga, however, with Jade and Yuki summoning it in Chapter 64 to secure a win for himself and Chaz Princeton in their tag duel against Tragodia. Interestingly, in this iteration, Ma'at was a fusion of Jaden's Wing Karibo and Chaz's Light Darkness Dragon. So, while the TCG version of Ma'at lost its fusion status in translation, we can still see an echo of its GX manga appearance and its summoning cost. Getting set up to take the number 6 spot on this list is the normal spell Ante. This card has been around since 2003's Magician 4 set, but has seen no competitive play, and it's not hard to see why. Ante has both you and your opponent reveal a card from your hand. For the player with a higher level card, nothing happens. But the player who reveals the card with a lower level must discard it and take 1000 points of burn damage. Hand ripping your opponent while inflicting burn damage isn't a bad effect. However, giving your opponent the ability to choose which card from their hand is maybe sent to the graveyard can put you at a disadvantage. Some cards want to live in the graveyard, and Ante might be giving your opponent an easy way to move them there. If your opponent doesn't have any monsters in hand, you're in luck because spells and traps are treated as level 0, meaning any monster will win against them in an Ante-off. While Ante's performance in the TCG has been pretty lackluster, its performance in Duel Links does not lackluster. In a format where life points start at 4000, burn damage is much more valuable. Above that, Duel Links starting hands are only 4 cards. An opening play of a successful Ante reduces your opponent's starting hand and life points by a quarter. Even when many Duel Links burn cards had their damage capabilities halved to scale their power down to intended levels, Ante escaped this reduction, sitting at its original 1000. This is probably because Ante has been de facto limited to 1 since its release in 2016, with that 1 copy only being available by leveling the Paradox Brothers all the way up to level 38. And that's a grind that might be worth it in Duel Links. Any deck that utilizes primarily high-level monsters can slot an Ante to cheesily finish close games. Some of these decks over the years have been Yubel, Xyz Trains, Time Lords, and also 3-star Demotion. A deck from early Duel Links that used the Paradox Brothers skill 3-star Demotion to normal summon strong level 7s like Suijin and Guardian Angel Joan without tributing. Persevering against the odds to claim number 5 on this list is the risky card Heart of the Underdog. This continuous spell released in 2004's Invasion of Chaos set, and has a very simple effect. When you top deck a normal monster during your draw phase, you can reveal it to draw another card. If that new draw is a normal monster, you can reveal it to draw another card ad infinitum. As long as you've got normals to draw, you can keep drawing. Here's the gamble. In order for Heart of the Underdog to realize value, you have to run enough normal monsters to justify it, which is a risk. If you fail to see Heart of the Underdog, or just have bad luck during the draw phase, all the heart in the world isn't going to save you from taking a major L. But the upside to Heart of the Underdog is potentially tremendous. Importantly, 4 out of 5 Exodia pieces are normal monsters, which makes Underdog Deep Draw Exodia a janky but workable win condition in GOAT format. And that's not even the only GOAT format deck that revolves around Heart of the Underdog. Just running lots of high attack normal monsters with strong backward removal like Mirror Force in order to charge can catch some wins. Another Heart of the Underdog GOAT strat is the Spirit Ryu OTK. Spirit Ryu is a level 4 wind dragon with 1000 attack and defense, and a quick effect during the damage step discard a dragon monster to gain another 1000 attack and defense until the end of the battle phase. Critically, this effect is not once per turn, so you can activate it as many times as you have dragons to lose. Here's a quick equation to explain. Heart of the Underdog plus a deck full of normal dragons can equal a Spirit Ryu with a 10,000 attack going for a game. It's unreliable, but that's the point. It's got heart, and brave souls with the grit to pull it off might find themselves drawing upwards of 10 cards and swinging for incredible amounts of damage. In episode 185 of the Duel Monsters anime, Yugimoto gives Heart of the Underdog as a gift to a kid named Rick who had a real running only normal dragons and nothing else problem, telling Rick that the card reminded him of a dear friend. That dear friend was Joey Wheeler. He is the underdog. In episode 186, Yami Yugi takes over for Rick in a duel against the Kaiba land computer gone haywire. The situation at first looks a bit bleak since Rick runs almost 0 good cards, but Heart of the Underdog let Yugi draw 5 normal dragons and Spirit Ryu, giving us a rare anime demonstration of an OTK. Still, there are other decks where you might find value by using Heart of the Underdog that don't revolve around an OTK, particularly pendulum archetypes that use lots of normal monsters like Metal Foes and Ignites. And turning the tables to take number 4 is the normal spell Reversal Quiz. Remember this guy and his magnificent mustache? Well, he's back and ready to answer more questions. To activate Reversal Quiz, you have to go all in, wagering all the cards from your hand and field and every life point you have. First, send everything. Hand, field, everything to the graveyard. Then declare a type of card, spell, trap, or monster, and then look at the top of your deck. If you got the call right, swap your life points with your opponents. If you're wrong, fizzle. Reversal Quiz released in 2003's Pharaonic Guardian set, and although it wouldn't see a large amount of competitive play, it was the key ingredient of a handful of placements it did receive. The big idea was to lower your life points as much as possible, and there are quite a few ways to do this, and then activate Reversal Quiz while copies of Black Pendant or Fuma Shuriken are on the field. If you can call the Reversal Quiz and foist your low life point value on your opponent while sending those equip spells to the grave as a cost, that can be game. After the resolution of Reversal Quiz, the graveyard effects of Black Pendant and Fuma Shuriken will activate, dealing 500 and 700 burn per, respectively. By bleeding enough life points before pulling a Reversal Quiz, you can take your opponent's starting life points to game over in one activation. And at number 3 of this no coins, no dice, all gambles cards list is the True Name. Releasing in 2016's Millennium Pack, the True Name is a reference to the Spirit of Millennium puzzle from the original Duel Monsters anime, Pharaoh Atem. When Atem inhabited the puzzle, much of his memories were sealed away, including his name, which is why he'd frequently go by a moniker inspired by his vessel living as Yami or Dark Yugi. The Duel Monsters anime is at its core Yugimoto and Atem's journey to solve the puzzle of the True Name. And after the ceremonial duel between the two, Atem is able to recover his lost memories and pass into the afterlife. The effect of the True Name is also a reference to the powers of Atem, which include manipulations of destiny to manifest whatever card he may need in a given situation. If you're like the Pharaoh Atem and able to anticipate your next draw, you can activate the True Name and declare the card on top of your deck. If correct, you can add it to your hand and then fetch a divine monster from your deck to also add to your hand, or special summon it to the field. A surprise Egyptian god card can be an intimidating sight for your opponent, but Ra and its other forms cannot be special summoned, and your other options, Slifer the Sky Dragon, Alms the Tormentor, share the effect that they must be sent to the graveyard during the end phase of the turn that they were special summoned. Because of this, you might just wind up adding to hand, but that also synergizes other cards like Egyptian God Slime, Soul Crossing, and Millennium Revelation that make getting out your gods a little easier. Slifer enjoyers might also use the True Name to cheat out Slifer precisely because it'll send itself to the grave, send up your grave for a massive activation of the Revived Sky God on your next turn. Although the True Name has only seen a meager amount of competitive plays, it's an important part of Divine Archetypes and a reference to the pivotal moment of the climax of the Duel Monsters anime. The number 2 spot on this list saw a wild amount of competitive play right out the gate after its 2016 release in the Dark Illusion set, and its relevance to the competitive scene has not diminished since. Pot of Desires is a normal spell and one of the many Pot of Greed rechains. It's actually a visual mix between Pot of Greed and Pot of Avarice, with the effect to draw 2 at the cost of banishing face down 10 cards from the top of your deck. There are other cards that let you pay a similarly steep cost to enjoy some cool extra draws, like Pot of Extravagance and Pot of Prosperity. So let's look at how these cards are different. Extravagance banishes face down 3 or 6 random cards from your extra deck to let you draw 1 for every 3 cards banished. Prosperity is similar, but you can choose which cards are banished face down, and instead of drawing, you'll activate the same number of cards and choose one to add to your hand. These are both gambles in their own way, but their cost can be mitigated within strategies that don't rely on their full extra deck. While most decks in Yu-Gi-Oh! Lean heavily on Synchro, Fusion, Xyz, and Link monsters, some archetypes like Toons, Hulunder-Rees, Umi Control, and more don't need it. Pot of Desires, on the other hand, is always a risk. 10 cards can be a fourth of your whole deck. And although you can partially offset this risk by running cards that are able to scale the number of banished cards like Grand Magi de Aiza, the risk persists. There's always a chance that in 10 cards lost, you'll remove something you'd rather draw. And that chance is always considerable enough that most people play the card by using it after they've already done their combo. But despite its downsides, it's evident from the enormous number of duelists who choose to take a Pot of Desires risk that doing so could be well worth it. Aren't desires to be chased after all? Trading in for the number 1 spot on this list is a normal spell that's been around since 2002, though most duelists wouldn't acquire their own copy until 2004 when it saw a wide release in Dark Beginning 1. Those few secret rare originals came in a promotional bundle alongside Graceful Dice and Skull Dice with Yu-Gi-Oh! The Eternal Duelist for the Game Boy Advance. That's right, we're talking about the time-honored spell and anime plot mechanic, Exchange. Upon activation, both players will reveal their hand and select one of their opponent's cards to take into their own. It's a trade, an exchange. At its baseline, the math doesn't add up to Exchange's owner's advantage. And literally, because using Exchange is always going to be a -1 in card advantage. But Exchange is also a gambit, and it might pay off masterfully. Let's take a peek at the card art, for example, of hugely successful Exchange. In it, we see 2 revealed hands. Duelist 1 has Exodia the Forbidden One, Right Leg of the Forbidden One, Left Arm of the Forbidden One, and Mirror Force. Duelist 2 has Raigeki, Pot of Greed, Dark Magician, and Time Wizard. Or actually, Duelist 2 had Raigeki, and Duelist 1 had Exodia the Forbidden One. The art of Exchange shows both of these cards to be the ones chosen for taking. Let's say Duelist 2 was the one who activated Exchange because anything else doesn't make any sense. It's generally not in your favor to grant extra card advantage to an Exodia deck. But despite this, Duelist 2's Exchange gamble is going to pay off in a major way. Since the beginning of the game, every Exodia piece has been limited to 1 copy. And since the Exodia win condition can only be achieved when a copy of every piece is in your hand, Duelist 2 has probably won this duel without summoning any monsters or inflicting any damage. All they have to do now is take a risk and activate Exchange. Why Duelist 1 swiped Raigeki when they were already sitting on Mirror Force instead of taking the sweet Pot of Greed is a mystery. But maybe they didn't know its effect. Pot of Greed, what does it do? No one knows. Exchange is a gamble, but as the person playing the card, you can swing the odds in your favor through timing and hand manipulation. Did you draw a Garnet or other card that'll just sit dead in your hand? Give that purposeless piece of cardstock to your opponent and take something from them that you can actually play. Steal Nibiru the Primal Being and start link climbing in total safety. If you're playing Master Duel, take your opponent's single copy of Branded Fusion and count the seconds until they scoop. Exchange is a big risk. But duelists have been winning even bigger for years, with decks that slot Exchange consistently scoring competitive TCG placements each year to the tune of 1 or 2 odd appearances per year. Then 2013 happened, and the use of Exchange increased drastically with the rise of the prominence of Prophecy decks. In 2014, usage had dropped off again, however. Often, Exchange would find its spots in side decks over main, giving duelists the option to levy its expensive and risky powers to hand-rip threats in games 2 and 3. In the Duel Monsters anime, Exchange was one of those cards everyone seemed to have and used it when it suited them. In episode 76, Yama-Yugi's duel against Merrick Ishtar through the proxy of the brainwashed Joey Wheeler. The stakes are high in that both duelists were tied to an anchor that will drop into the Battle City Harbor, and only the winner will have the ability to free themselves. During the duel, Yama-Yugi drew Joey's Red Eyes Black Dragon, which he had temporarily taken ownership of after winning it back from the unnamed rare hunter who somehow had 3 copies of every Exodia card. Yugimoto overpowered the Pharaoh to play Exchange against the spirit of the puzzle's wishes in a huge gamble that Joey's connection to his Red Eyes might shock his bestie back to his senses. Merrick was thrilled at this decision and attempted to influence Joey to take back his ace monster, but Joey resisted and instead grabbed card destruction. Much later in episode 96, Yami Bakura and Yami Merrick duel through the night atop the Kaiba Court blimp. Yami Bakura, temporarily hosting the displaced spirit of Merrick Ishtar, had advanced knowledge of Yami Merrick's strategies, and leveraged this insight to counter Yami Merrick's The Winged Dragon of Ra, using Exchange to steal Merrick's only copy of the God card. Unfortunately, this strategy would ultimately fail, as Yami Merrick would activate Joyful Doom, an anime-exclusive card that interferes with an opponent's attempted tribute summon by reducing the attack of the tributes to 0, and gaining life points equal to the result. This caused the Winged Dragon of Ra's anime effect of gaining the sum of its tributes to result in Egyptian god with an attack of 0. Yamabakura would later give up the ghost and tribute Ra to summon Dark Ruler Hades, a mistake that would ultimately cost him the duel, since the monster reborn claimed by Yami Merrick during exchange would let him revive his god card. Exchange would again return in episode 129, this time used by Yami to reclaim Cypher the Sky Dragon from Seto Kaiba during the Battle City semifinals after it was stolen through the effect of Lullaby of Obedience. A little later in episode 138, Yami would use Exchange in his Battle City finals match against Yami Merrick. Having noted Merrick's tendency to dump his god into the grave and bring it back with Monster Reborn, Yugi made sure to use Exchange to take this card from Merrick. Finally, Exchange would be used by Raphael, against Yami this time, in their desert duel from episode 156. Raphael activated this card while both duelists had one card remain in hand, creating a forced trade situation where Yami had to take temporary ownership of the Silver Calcos, an evil but powerful card that would prove too tempting to the Pharaoh, resulting in the Great Leviathan absorbing the soul of Yugimoto after the Spirit of the Puzzle played the seal and then lost. Exchange gets number 1 for its storied place in the Duel Monsters anime and for its niche competitive experimentation. Alright, and that's the list. But Yu-Gi-Oh! Is full of chancy cards that rely on neither coin nor dice. So if we missed your favorite, or if you have more ideas for future videos just like this one, I'd love to hear about them down in the comments.
It's a war out there every day. You can't hide from me. You gotta pray for the roots, pretty cool, calling out in the face of the saddest street. When your friends and boss look alike on the face of it, they miss the history, but they fight all the place in it. Yeah, they fight all the place in it. How they plan the times, they just have to let the fight. And it's natural to say, but there ain't no other way. So step on up to the plate. Need your faith, what can spin on into the light of earth. Step on up to the plate.
Oh, that's hilarious. enemies now face reality. Never be charity. The enemy you're fighting covers whole society. Damn, fun is not here, gonna fun all night. Right here, shadow 10 o'clock direction. Seize the moment, destroy the nation. Your rhymes slow motion.